You well?
That's great, thank you. So hello, I'm Sarah, I'm the Ridgeway National Trail Officer, and this is a great opportunity for myself and Julie from the Thames Valley Environmental Record Centre to update you on what we know about the biodiversity value of the Ridgeway. So many of you might be aware of the Ridgeway as a national trail, so that's as a public access corridor, so a place for people to walk, cycle, horse ride, picnic, take photos, and even some of you might know it as a place to go bird watching, for example. But we want to work hard to promote the Ridgeway as a place of biodiversity interest, and in particular as an important corridor for biodiversity in terms of our country's ecological network. So the idea of this presentation is I'll spend sort of 10 minutes doing my few slides, and then Julie from Thames Valley Environmental Record Centre, she's got a few slides. And then we're both very keen to hear your questions and to discuss any points that you might have, because we're very keen that this presentation sort of inspires you and makes you feel that the Ridgeway has some biodiversity value, and to get your feedback on what you think we can do for the future to maintain but also enhance its biodiversity interest. So just to start with, I thought it'd just be interesting to show you this photo, which was published in 1941. That's not that long ago, when a part of the Ridgeway was being used to drive sheep, move sheep. This photo just shows you how it's not that long ago that sheep were being moved along the Ridgeway. So the Ridgeway has a history as a droveway, and that interaction between humans, animals, and vegetation is something that I think is important and something to bear in mind. So just to ensure everybody's aware, the Ridgeway National Trail is 87 miles long. It stretches from Overton Hill, which is near Avebury in Wiltshire, goes through the North Wessex Downs O&B to the River Thames, where it crosses at Goring Streatley, and then continues through the Chilterns to Ivinghoe Beacon, which is near Luton and Dunstable in Luton and Dunstable in Bedfordshire. And as I was saying, as well as it being a public access corridor, some of you might be aware that it has some historic interest. This picture that I've taken from the Ancient Britain map by Ordnance Survey and Historic England shows how the Ridgeway is, at least parts of it are considered to potentially date back to prehistoric times. And for example, we've got a long barrow called Wayland Smithy, which is believed to have been constructed as long ago as 3590 BC. So the Wayland Smithy is over 5,000 years old, and so I think it's safe to say that there were prehistoric people using the area around Wayland Smithy, and therefore using the Ridgeway in that area as long ago as 5,000 years ago. And when we think about that history, and think about what has happened since that time, and the changes in land management and human activity in the area, it's interesting to see how the Ridgeway is definitely in some parts a part of the landscape that is a corridor of continuity. And as we know, for biodiversity, continuity and that opportunity to be long established is very important. And this aerial photo shows how the Ridgeway is a strip of land that crosses miles and miles of farmed land. And the photo on the left is at the small scale and shows that whilst you do have that track that's worn by people walking, cycling, horse riding, even tractors in some places, that there are these verge areas where biodiversity can thrive. And to give you a sense of scale, in on the Bury Down area, which is near the A34 above East and West Ilsley, the Ridgeway there from boundary to boundary is 40 metres wide. So it shows you the potential area of habitat in the verges that we've got. So this prehistoric history, potentially along in some parts of the Ridgeway, I think has some interest from a biodiversity point of view. And there's a book written about Blueburton Hill, which is a hill fort near Blueberry in Oxfordshire, and that's not far from the Ridgeway at all, where one of the chapters talks about the plants that might have been around at the time of Neolithic man. And I think it's interesting to think about that, because some of these plants that grow along the Ridgeway might be a glimpse back into that prehistoric past. And the author Bernadine Shirley Smith, in this book called A View from the Hill, which was published in 2006, she talks about these plants which survived the last ice age and once grew in semi-Arctic grassland. So she's looked at these species that are present in the pollen record, and she lists species such as salad burnet, bird's foot trefoil, common rock rose, self-heal. So these are all plants that you get along the Ridgeway now. There are also the plants that she thinks are associated with cultivation and therefore might have been brought over or kind of encouraged by the activities of Neolithic man. And they're species such as hoary plantain, shepherd's purse, common chickweed. And again, we get those sorts of plants along the Ridgeway. Then looking a bit closer to the modern day, Druce wrote his Flora of Berkshire in 1897, so that's just over 100 years ago, and he recognised the Ridgeway as a place of botanic interest. So here there's a nice sentence that he wrote, which was, "A walk along the Ridgeway from Uffington to Wantage would pass over ground which would afford a considerable number of the species already enumerated in the list of plants." And he talks here about Leckham Castle, which some people might know now as Sexbury Camp, and that's a hill fort near the Ridgeway, just above Wantage. And he talks there about how Chiltern gentian was plentiful there. But just a caution, a word of caution, you know, we can tend to think, well, some of us can tend to think that in the past biodiversity was much richer and better, and in a lot of cases that is true, but to say they did have problems just over 100 years ago. So Druce talks about Canadian pondweed and there being lots of nettles along the Ridgeway, so it wasn't all amazing biodiversity. So what Thames Valley Environmental Record Centre did last summer, and this is where Julie's presentation will give you some detail, they looked at what we've got along the Ridgeway National Trail now between Streatley-on-Thames and Avebury in Wiltshire. And it was very reassuring, but also surprising and rewarding to discover that over 330 species were recorded. Some of those are on the England Red List. And then bearing in mind my point about the Ridgeway's role in the Ecological Network, just to flag that there are 4 sites of special scientific interest that connect to the Ridgeway, and the Ridgeway itself, there are also parts that are designated as local wildlife sites. So it shows how the Ridgeway is this important linear feature linking sites. So thinking about the ecological network and how the Ridgeway, we think, definitely has areas of habitat and species interest. We just want to raise awareness with audiences such as yourself that the Ridgeway National Trail isn't just a public access corridor, it's also an area of habitat and a corridor in the ecological network. We think its function could be enhanced for its own benefit and for the wider ecological network, through, for example, working with adjacent landowners where we could ask them to manage their field margins, but even entire land parcels to be sympathetic to biodiversity, and also to think about the byways and other linear features that connect the Ridgeway. And in actual fact, some of the historic routeways that connect to the Ridgeway might have as much interest as the Ridgeway itself. We just don't know, but there is that potential. Then thinking about how the Ridgeway plays this role in the grassland network, I just wanted to flag that wildflowers associated with chalk grassland can be poor dispersers. So we may need to carry out intervention to try and expand the area of chalk grassland habitat along the Ridgeway and elsewhere. But also to bear in mind that as a public access corridor, it might be interesting to see how humans and animals can help to disperse seeds. And then thinking about those species groups that can travel greater distances, it's thinking about how the Ridgeway and sites can be designed or connected up so that the gaps in between can be can be overcome by bees, beetles, moths, butterfly species, and so on. This last slide is just looking at the different factors to bear in mind when we're thinking about the future of the Ridgeway and what we and future generations might need to do to maintain but also enhance the Ridgeway and make sure it plays that key role in the ecological network. So we've got farmers and sheep that we need to work with, but also thinking not just about plants. The Ridgeway is associated with a lot of farmland bird species, and that's a photo of a corn bunting, and then of course our butterflies. There's also a picture here of a Field Studies Council ID guide that was produced for the Pennine Way. We'd very much like to do that for the Ridgeway, so that the members of the public can engage with and understand what valuable biodiversity there is along the trail. And in 2023, it's our anniversary year, our 50th anniversary of the Ridgeway National Trail, and we'd quite like to launch an ID guide like that in 2023. And here, this is a map. This is a vision that is being called the Big Chalk, and it's where the chalk landscapes of southern England, so that's the Cotswolds, North Wessex Downs, Chilterns, South Downs, and so on, are working together to try and make sure that we contribute as much as we can to the nation's ecological network, which national government is referring to as nature recovery networks. And as you can see, the Ridgeway could play a key role in that. This last slide, which Julie and the polls, will be running a poll later, will bring out what sort of questions or prompts we'd like you to think about, and how you might help us in future. So, for example, as recorders, we're quite keen for there to be more recording activity along the Ridgeway and on adjacent land parcels. So anything that you might be able to do to help us, we'd be really keen to hear. I'll stop sharing now, and I'll let Julie take over.
Brilliant. Let's see if I can share. People see that?
Yeah, that's good.
Brilliant. Okay. So I'm Julie Kerans. I'm the Oxfordshire Biodiversity Officer for TVERC, and I'm just going to talk you through the survey we did last year. So as Sarah was saying, this is just an illustration of the Ridgeway, but this is chopped off to the section that we actually surveyed. So the Ridgeway continues up to the northeast, but this is the 44-mile, which is roughly 70-kilometre section from Avebury in Wiltshire through a bit of Oxfordshire to Streatley in Berkshire, which was the area we covered. So it's not all of it, but it was a pretty sizable long stretch of it. So the aims of the project were to carry out baseline survey to help us get an up-to-date picture of the type, location and area of habitats that are there, and to recommend which bits have got grassland that should be prioritised for management. So we went out and did the baseline survey, which involved 3 surveyors over 12 days between June and August. We used UK HAB survey methodology, which is similar to phase 1, which is the thing that we're all moving over to now, because it's likely to make future work that requires any biodiversity net gain calculations much more straightforward. So we split up that massive length of the trail into sections and recorded plant species lists with DAFOR abundances for each section. This is just an example of the habitat mapping that we did. So it's a little bit long and linear and possibly quite hard to see, but there's a report which has got these all in, and there's also GIS mapping, which will hopefully be useful for looking in detail at what we recorded. And you can also see there's the numbers at the sections, and then we've got target notes all the way along highlighting points of interest. And this is just a summary table of the areas of the different habitats that we recorded. It's worth noting that a couple of the habitat types are possibly a little bit disproportionately represented, because there was a few arable fields. For most of the Ridgeway, we were just recording the narrow corridor, but in a few sections it passes through larger either arable fields or some of the more modified grassland. And because we map up to the nearest boundary, you end up including quite a big field, and that kind of bumps up the total for the actual length that the trail passes through. But there genuinely was quite a lot of Aranatharum grassland, as you would probably expect. 67.5 hectares mapped. And it was also nice to see that there's a fair amount of lowland calcareous grassland already there, with 29.7 hectares, and some of the other grassland types. Other habitats, there's small amounts of woodlands and scrub, including small amounts of lowland mixed deciduous woodland. And you can also see we've got the linear features there. Another priority habitat, which was hedgerows, real good length. We weren't quite expecting it to be quite that much, but we mapped 46.7 kilometres, which is good. So just put in a few photos of examples of the priority habitats that we found. So this is lowland calcareous grass, and this is how we found a lot of the examples, which were these narrow strips just along the verges. But there's also a few locations where, as Sarah has already mentioned, at Bury Down, for example, where you've got much wider strips, so nicer chunks of habitat. And this is just a little overview map, pinpointing points where we've recorded the lowland calcareous grass, and then you can kind of see it is pretty widespread. There's definitely sections where it's a little bit more continuous, and sections where it's a lot more gappy. Here's just a few photos of the hedgerow habitat, which is pretty variable. Some quite long lengths that we've mapped it as hedgerows, but they are quite gappy. To make it priority habitat, it's got to have 80% native species, which is most of what we recorded. And you do include these quite gappy sections quite often, because if the lines of trees and shrubs have gaps of less than 20 metres long, you tend to map it as a single hedge, so it can be quite scattered. But you've also got sections that are a lot more continuous, like the second photo. Another priority habitat that we found was lowland mixed deciduous woodland, but there was a lot less of this. There's only just really a few scattered blocks, and they mostly tended to occur where you'd got just narrow linear strips along the path edges, just about wide enough to count as woodland. Other habitats that we got included the typical Aranatharum grassland that you find along road verges pretty commonly. It's the type of grassland that doesn't get a lot of management. It's often cut once a year or less, and you've got common species in that, like hogweed and kettle parsley. But you do get nicer examples, which is the bottom right hand photo, where you can get quite a lot of things like meadow vetchling and hedge cranesbill, meadow cranesbill, which is quite nice. Some of the woodland was plantation, so there's just a few examples of that, and also a little bit of scrub habitat. Another thing we recorded were veteran trees. There were a few larger trees, as you can see there, but most of the ones that we noted were large hawthorns and a few crabapples, which would be interesting to look into more thoroughly. But yeah, we didn't really have time to look in any great detail, but there's definitely some interest there. So species recorded, we added 6,344 species records. As Sarah's already said, 330 different species, 307 plant species, incidental sightings for a few other things, including invertebrates, reptiles and mammals. Quite a few protected and notable species records, which was good. Overall good range of typical indicator species for lowland calcareous grassland, which we've got a list of here, but I won't dwell on it too much, but it's quite a nice list. And then also the typical species as well as the indicators. The indicators are more associated with older grasslands. The typical species tend to come in more recent or restored grassland. And there's a few pictures of them. So we've got some nice species there, including horseshoe vetch, pyramidal orchid, kidney vetch, chalk milkwort, twayblade, fairy flax and dropwort, clustered bellflower, common century, sainfoin, greater knapweed and field scabious. A couple of other interesting plants we found are knapweed broomrape and white helleborine, and some non-plant things included small heath, small blue, cinnabar moth, and skylark and common lizard. One great result from the project was that we identified a particularly rich stretch of grassland next to White Horse Hill Triple SI, which we've now actually added as a local wildlife site. Last month it got accepted, so that's a good result from the project. And another good result was that we managed to identify 143 locations which we were recommending for management, including 10.5 hectares which we're recommending for maintaining conditions. So they're the nicer bits which we just want to keep nice, and also 33.2 hectares which has got some interest, but we need a little bit more work to possibly restore, but it's got potential to be nice. And they're the locations of those. So again, pretty widespread across the route, but definitely some concentrations and also some more gappy sections. So project outputs, there is a survey report. We've got to do a few final tweaks, but I think Sarah's going to make that available if people want to read a lot more about it. We'll hold the species records, but we've also sent some to Wiltshire because that was part of the area. There'll be the digitised habitat mapping, digitised survey sections, target net locations, including the vector trees, and the priority habitat areas. And we've also made a number of recommendations for further work, which I won't dwell on too much because I think we're running low on time. But yeah, there's still plenty to do, including additional survey work, which these are the things we were suggesting as potential things that might be good. But yes, we have got some questions coming up, so if other people have got other ideas, please do flag those up. So there's just our contact details in there if anybody wants to get in touch. And to kick us off, we've got first question. There is going to be a little poll which hopefully Henrietta can share with us to follow up this, but as a first kick-off question, we'd like to ask you which species should we be managing the Ridgeway for? We have just like, these are things that we were thinking might be possible things, but yes, please do suggest your own in the chat, and we can, we can yeah, discuss because we might not have all the answers. We might not know what's the best, so you can tell us. Okay. I want to get back to see everybody. Not sure I can't leave that up and stop presenting, can I? Can I? I'll just stop presenting.
Right, I'll just put up the information about the poll. Oh, that's great. I can see people are starting to enter things already. So yes, if you open up if you either go to the link in the chat or open up a separate window and go to slido.com and enter that number, you should be able to see this question. So it'd be great if you could just enter whatever you think we should be prioritising. Is anyone having any issues accessing it?
I did wonder, just to get a discussion going, if anybody was aware of any sort of local specialties along the Ridgeway, or are there any species that people particularly associate with the Ridgeway that they'd like to see prioritised? I mean, any particular plants or butterflies? So I've got corn bunting, but I just wondered if you as a group.
Yeah, I think with us identifying the lowland calcareous grassland habitat, that's kind of what, certainly from the report, we were suggesting would be like a clear thing that we could do. But I think there is always that thing that, because there is quite a lot of other potential species interest there, it's good if other people who know about all these things, especially things like particular butterflies and moths, or we can incorporate that, because if you just manage purely for one thing, you can sometimes miss a trick and have negative effects on other creatures that might be there without really realising it.
Mm.
I've got a few birds coming in.
Just out of interest, Julie, not putting you on the spot, but so Druce was talking about frog orchids. Did we see a frog orchid?
We didn't.
No.
But I think we would have got quite excited and made a few publicity noises about that.
Shall I move on to the next one, and then we can always come back?
People can ask us other questions as well if you want to in the chat. That's, you know, other related.
So, well, one thing that we've talked to Thames Valley Environmental Record Centre about is potentially holding a field visit once a year on the Ridgeway, haven't we, to see if we can build the records. So it'd be quite interesting to know if any of you are interested in that sort of thing. And
this isn't necessarily a commitment. It's anonymous anyway, but it's just to gauge interest. Oh, there we go. And if anyone does want to commit their time, then do please email Sarah. I think your email address, put her email address in there, so do follow up.
Yes, Henrietta said there's no massive commitment, you know, just if you want to find out more and anything that we would make sure that we can find something that you'd be interested in and that would fit in with your time. Yeah.
I would say I'd visited sites before, because there's already a few local wildlife sites along the Ridgeway, and I must say it was really nice to actually go and spend more time and get more of an idea about how it all connects up. It's a nice place to go and spend some time, and we can actually, now we know where nice bits are, depending on what you're interested in. Hopefully we can focus on the nice bits. Like, you can go spend some time somewhere nice.
And the thing is, it's so easy to organise because it's all publicly accessible.
Yeah.
You can just go whenever you like. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just go back to the first question about the species, just to because I can see we've had more votes, so just see if we can get any more ideas for that one.
I guess in a way, if nobody's got any strong views, it just means you won't mind with what we end up trying to do.
Good. Oh, we're getting into the swing of it now.
Thank you.
Well, what I'll do is because we had some polls on the same link about about our work and about TVERC and about how we can help you. So I'll leave all these polls running so that then for the next few days, so that you can still access them and we can still gauge feeling and opinion.
And to ask Henrietta, there's a question in the chat about, could you tell me where the published report will be made available? So we'll be putting the report on the Ridgeway National Trail news webpage, but I think TVERC are going to send a post-event email and we can put the link in there.